Online students, am I audible? Good afternoon to all of you. So from today, we'll start with our syllabus. Okay, so I hope all of you understand by now the topic of modern India. It will start with the arrival of European companies. So when we talk with respect to European companies, we'll first try to understand about the motives overall, why the Europeans wanted to come to India. Probably the most important thing it was the trade, कि भाई trade करना है, ठीक है? The motives are very clear. Second, the sequence of these companies. Third, we'll understand about their policies plus the relationship that they share with various indigenous dynasties. And finally, eventually we'll discuss the winner out of them, and that would be British. So that would be the last part. First we'll talk about the motives, sequence, policies, relationship, and last would be the winner. उसके बाद से फिर हम कल tomorrow we'll be discussing about 18th century, and then we'll move on with the various expansion motives of the British. तो बाद में करेंगे. I hope all of you have handout number 1. Yes. So on page number 1 you can see the various motives. Let us try to understand why the Portuguese became the first one to come towards India. This PPT will be shared with you. Okay? So there were various factors which prompted the Europeans to search for the new inroads into India. There were various factors which were responsible for that. Number 1, it was a decline of feudal system in Europe. In Europe, we have seen the beginning of the process of creation of nation state. We see the beginning of creation of England, France. These two were the most powerful countries. But along with these two, we also see the rise of other powers like Spanish as well as Portugal. So this decline of the feudal system was now led to creation of very strong monarchy, and these monarchies were ready to sponsor the various voyages of the travelers. कि आप भाई घूम फिर के आओ, दुनिया घूमो, हमें बताओ कहाँ पे कौन है, ठीक है? So that's why they became more of the sponsors, and this is one of the major reason, the major political reason. Okay, that's why they were able to come to India. Second, this created a sense of urgency among all of them. The urgency was the Turks. We see the rise of Ottoman Empire. This Ottoman Empire was able to now bring in the inroads even up to Europe, and the most strategic place in whole of their linkages in the trade between Asia and Europe. This is Constantinople. And in today's time, what is that point? It is known as, what is the capital of Turkey? Istanbul. So Constantinople today is known as Istanbul. So that was the strategic area which came under the control of Ottomans. Now the Ottomans started asking for more charges from the Europeans. तो भाई directly सीधी बात है, if it makes any commercial sense, they would find a direct route which can eventually break down the monopoly of Turks. जैसे इंडिया केस में होता है, India wants to go to Central Asia, but in between comes which country? Pakistan. So that's why we have to always go for alternative routes. This is exactly what these people were trying to do. कि भाई ठीक है, we'll go for something else. Then, if we see in the cultural domain, two important things were going on in Europe. One was Renaissance. Renaissance was about the revival of the past, revival of the ethos of Romans as well as Greeks. And along with this, we also see the rise of age of exploration. Renaissance को जब भी हम पढ़ते हैं, this is not a topic in our syllabus as such, but just try to understand very briefly, because this concept will come in our social religious reform movements. Renaissance basically means revival. Okay, revival, the culture of Greeks, Romans, So, in a way, Renaissance was trying to ensure that the man should understand its basic cultural roots, and at the same time, Renaissance became the spirit of inquiry. And with the spirit of inquiry, they went to different places in the world. India was not the only place. I hope all of you know that. Okay. India, Vasco da Gama came in 1498. Before that, there was Christopher Columbus. है ना, वो इंडिया ढूंढते ढूंढते कहाँ चले गए, अमेरिका. ठीक है, उनको ग्रीन कार्ड मिल गया था सीधा. Now you must have seen that if any Indian wants a green card today, you have to wait for only 190 years. कितने साल? 190 years. For those were the times passports were not there, green cards were not there. But anyway, in 1492, Christopher Columbus wanted to come towards India, but he went towards USA. This was the age of inquiry, age of exploration. They wanted to know about more cultures which are there in the world. So this becomes one of the major factor why eventually they wanted to come towards different areas, including India. Then these states also wanted to challenge the monopoly of merchants of Italy, specifically Spanish and Portugal. Spanish and Portugal. These two are known as Iberian states. Just like India में हिमालय बहुत famous है, वहाँ पे क्या Iberian Peninsula is there. So these two Iberian states, they wanted to break the monopoly of the merchants of Italy because Venice used to be the center point or the focal point of trade. तो इसलिए भी उनको एक specific motivation था. Demand of Oriental goods. Oriental means all the goods from Indian side or from the eastern part of the world. That is known as Oriental. So अपने पास क्या है सबसे ज़्यादा? Spices. Okay, spices were very famous. Textiles were very famous, and that's why since the demand was growing, it made sense to have a direct connect with India. Technological advancement were also very important. सिर्फ विश करने से कुछ नहीं होता, थोड़ी सी टेक्नोलॉजी भी चाहिए, है ना. वंस यू आर इनटू द शिप यू रिक्वायर कंपास कि जा किधर रहे हैं, है ना. ऐसा तो है नहीं कि हाँ बस चलो चलो इंडिया चलते हैं सारे. कंपास इज रिक्वायर्ड प्लस गन पाउडर. व्हाई गन पाउडर वाज रिक्वायर्ड? Because safety purpose. Armed trade was something which was going to become the traditions of the day. And finally, cartography. If there is no map of the world, where would you wish to go eventually? So सारी चीज़ों की technological advancement यूरोप में होने लग गई थी, and this played a very important role. So always understand technology will always play a very important role. Then religious factors were also there. Christianity, the promotion of Christianity became one of the center point behind the European traveling to different parts of the world. In fact, the Pope of those time, Pope Nicholas V, itself had given Prince Henry, he was the Prince Henry of Portugal, a bull was given to him to signify this duty of exploring seas of distant shores in order to promote Christianity. These were the various factors. Can you understand the political factors, economic factors, social factor, religious factor, and even the technological factor? So if a 10 marker question comes, अगर एग्जाम में ऐसा 10 marker question आता है कि critically examine the factors responsible for the arrival of Europeans in India. Can you write an answer on that? लिख सकते हो? ठीक है, अभी नहीं लिखवा. Yes. Feudal system means previously majority of these countries were divided in nature, but now monarchy started becoming strong. If there is only one person for taking decision, if there are 25 or hundreds of people for taking decision, which one will win? Monarchy. ठीक है, coalition era, UP alliance versus Modi ji. ठीक है, so feudalism is when multiple people have power, and when multiple people have power, there is no power center in fact. तो क्या होता है, डिवाइड हो जाता है डिसीजन. बट हियर द मोनार्कीज वर बिकमिंग स्ट्रॉन्ग. द मोनार्कीज वर ब्रिंगिंग इन रिसोर्सेज अंडर देयर control, and once they have that control, eventually they can sponsor large number of voyages, so people could go to great distances just because they were being helped by the monarchy. Like in this case, Henry of Portugal, so he was having close connections with Pope also, so they were also have a kind of helping each other. The promotion of Christianity is going to help the cause of Pope. Eventually he was the leader of the religious world. And on the other hand, if Portugal is going to go to different territory, this will increase the strength of Portugal, like it eventually happened in the case of India. Many territories came under their control, Daman, Diu, and Commercially also, it became very fantastic for this country. In fact, Portugal initially came towards India, 15th century. Spain went towards America. Largely the American part remained under the control of Spain. So all whole of Latin America, Mexico, all this came under the control of Spain, while the Portugal came towards India. When we'll discuss later on the topic of imperialism. Imperialism means increasing the power of motherland in basic language. So these were the early imperialists. One was Spain, the second was Portugal. So try to understand it. ये बाद में वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में टॉपिक आएगा कि imperialism में बहुत सारी waves हैं. These are the first category states, Spanish and Portugal. But then these two will be defeated by Dutch and English. And then will come the biggest rivalry of the imperialist world. That is the English versus French. This will not be played only in India. This will be played in multiple theatre across the world. Then we'll see the unification of Germany and Italy by 19th century, 1870s. Then these countries will try to get many area under their control. So these are the stages of imperialism also. Same कहानी है, अलग अलग terms से explain करते हैं. Like right now, our focus is on only one thing, that is what were the factors which were responsible for the why the Europeans wanted to make inroad towards different parts of the world. And one such area which came under their control was India. I hope this is clear to all of you. ठीक है. So these are the factors. Please read your handout, page number 1. Largely same information is given there. Just have a basic reading of that. So let us revise that. Introductory part. 15th, 16th century in India marks the arrival of Europeans or the colonial powers in India. It is remarked that the Europeans came to India in search of gold, glory and gold. Three important factors were there. Religious factor because of God. And that is what is important. Second is glory, imperialism. They wanted more territories under their control. And finally, a trade which is going to be favorable for them. So that is the gold. So these are the three primary factors जो हमें समझ में आते हैं बड़ी आसानी से. ठीक है. कभी भी इंट्रोडक्शन लिखना हो on any European companies, this can be used as an introduction. Is that clear? Because many of you will find difficulty in writing introductions on such topics. तो नहीं तो फिर वास्को डी गामा के बारे में बात कर सकते हो. अभी उसके बात करेंगे डिटेल में. अभी पहले इनिशियली बस लॉजिकली समझ लो कि why these people wanted to come to India. So we have seen the political factors. Political factors are very important. These people were now turning into nation states, and that's why they wanted to have control over overseas territories. The same was the situation in Portugal as well as Spain. You can see from the map, these two were strategically placed. These two were strategically placed, and not one. There were so many people who were part of this. The travelers part, like there was Cabot, Cartier. We had already talked about Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Okay, and there's, if you read geography, there is a Magellan state. This Magellan state is named after the traveler itself. So there were so many travelers which were going from these territories. So this is the reason. Okay, you have to remember glory. Glory was very, very important for these people. They wanted that everywhere everybody should know about Portugal, Spain, their kings. They should embrace Christianity. These were the major factors. Plus trade to thai. Like all of us know, when Vasco da Gama came for the first trip, when he went back, 60 times profit. 60 times, that is humongous. 60 times profit, समझते हो ना कितना ज्यादा होता है? 1 रुपया इन्वेस्ट किया, कितना रुपया मिल गया? 60 रुपये. Understand? So that is something which captured their imagination. All of them, they knew about India, but they were not having direct. Yes, direct way was not there. Okay, so let us see the factors. Number one more time, Turkish control of Constantinople. So this is the area roughly. Okay, this is the area which was very strategic, because if you wish to go from Asia, Silk Route भी कहाँ से pass करता है? यहाँ से pass on करता है. So this area, that's why Turkey becomes very prominent. And this Constantinople, which came under the control of Turkey, eventually brought all these European powers to a halt. And now they wanted to have control over, or direct control to India. So right, you can just underline it. Ottoman Turks established their control over Constantinople in 1453. This was a strategy located at the intersection of Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, through which Euro-Asian trade passed. And once Turks became controller of this area, they started collecting high taxes as well as duties. In order to avoid this, a direct sea route was required to reduce the monopoly of Arab intermediaries. Okay, so this was very important. And along with, like we have already mentioned, the revival of these countries, or the transition towards the creation of nation states, or the era of feudalism, was now on the decline in Europe. Social factors, Renaissance, and second was age of exploration. We can see so many explorers going from one place to another. Economic factors, you can see they wanted to challenge the trade monopoly of Italy. Italy used to come, this was the first major country, and this Italy was the one which was controlling the trade, and that's why Italy के monopoly को भी इन्होंने control करना था. And finally, the demand for Oriental goods was on the rise. If we see technological factors, so we have already seen compass, cartography. Cartography means map making. Okay, cartographer उन्हीं को बोलते हैं. The profession is those people who make maps, which helps in the navigation process. Shipbuilding technology. Look, shipbuilding is also very prominent. If we see ships, they are of different sizes, different nature, different categories of ships are there. Some are just for the traveling purpose, some are for the goods. So those new categories of shipbuilding also helped in the arrival of European towards India. And finally, as we have already seen, religious factor. The Pope Nicholas met Henry and eventually gave him a bull that you should go and promote Christianity all over the world. Okay, so try to understand at that point of time. Yes. So what is the meaning of bull? Bull is just like a symbol. Okay, it's a symbol that Christianity should survive. So religious symbol जैसे इंडिया में बहुत सारे हैं for different religion. Similarly, they have a bull for that purpose. Strength. Bull means strength. Yes.
Sir, can we include the economic factor, the transition of capitalism?
Capitalism will come a little bit later, because capitalism is something which is more directly linked with industrial capitalism. एक कमर्शियल रेवोल्यूशन टर्म होता है, वो बाद में पढ़ेंगे. ठीक है, अभी उन सब में मत जाओ, सारे कंसेप्ट आगे पीछे हो जाएंगे. बिकॉज कैपिटलिज्म इज मोर अबाउट व्हेन यू हैव द कंट्रोल ओवर द फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. तो वो अभी नहीं आया है इतना इस टाइम पे, बिकॉज इंडस्ट्री उतनी सेंट्रलाइज हुई नहीं है. वो जो सारा पेटेंट्स वगैरह जो है ना इंग्लैंड में स्टार्ट होता है, वो सारा 17वीं सेंचुरी के बाद शुरू होगा. तो अभी उसको रहने दो. ठीक है, बाद में वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री का पार्ट बनता है कि what is commercial revolution, what is agricultural revolution. There are so many revolution which led to the industrial revolution in 18th century. तो वो आराम से करेंगे, अभी उसके पीछे नहीं जाते हैं. तो सारे आपके कंसेप्ट ऊपर नीचे हो जाएंगे. आई होप दिस पार्ट इज क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू. व्हाई यूरोपियंस केम टू इंडिया. पॉलिटिकल, सोशल, इकोनॉमिक, टेक्नोलॉजिकल, कल्चरल, सारे फैक्टर्स आपको याद रखने हैं. These are going to be your sub headings. So tomorrow you'll write a question. लिखो इसको, critically examine the various factors with respect to the arrival of Europeans in India. It's a very basic level question, 10 marks. You have to write 2 pages, 3 areas where you will try to work. First, you will write an introduction, then create a body structure. Like body structure in this case, like we've just seen, we have political reasons also, social, economic, technological, all of this will become part of structure. And finally, conclusion. So by the end of today's class, you'll understand कि conclusion क्या रहेगा. That once the European companies came, eventually it created competition among themselves, and this eventually led to the indulge in Indian politics, and this is how British became the most important European entity. Anyway, so try to write it tomorrow at the beginning of the class. हम इसको डिस्कस करेंगे, ठीक है? तो ये लिख लोगे ना, आसान है, इतना मुश्किल मुझे नहीं लगता इसमें कुछ होना चाहिए, बट अपनी तरफ से क्रिएटिविटी यूज करने का. जब भी जैसे आप अभी शुरुआत में इंट्रोडक्शन लिखोगे तो कोशिश करो 2 इंट्रोडक्शन लिखने की एडिशनल. एक क्वेश्चन में आंसर में 2 इंट्रो नहीं लिखने, दिस और दिस, फॉर योर ओन सेटिस्फैक्शन कि which introduction is looking more better. And tomorrow we'll understand the variety of introduction which can be used in modern India. फिर उसके बाद स्ट्रक्चर का बात करेंगे. स्ट्रक्चर इज मोर लाइक द रियल कंटेंट. ओके, here the word we have used is critically examine. Critically examine means in-depth understanding बताओ मैं उनकी. Okay, in-depth analysis is going to be required. This is what is the meaning of critically examine. Critically का मतलब ये नहीं होता कि negative, हमेशा negative की तरफ नहीं होता, critique जैसे word होता है. So critically means in-depth. All right, so in-depth analysis the various factors. So critically examine का meaning वो याद रखना है. Let us now shift towards आगे के पार्ट पे चलते हैं. Nisha, Renaissance is nothing but it means revival. The previous cultures of Greeks and Roman, they were trying to revive that because they thought that cultural progress was humongous in the past, and that's why they were trying to revive it eventually. तो उसी को हम Renaissance बोलते हैं. And within Renaissance there were so many things which were going on. ठीक है, तो उसी का इफेक्ट यहाँ पे. In world history we'll have closer look at that topic. Here we have to just mention it. Let us see now why Portuguese became the first. What were the factors? अभी तो हमने सिर्फ ये बात किया why the Europeans wanted to come to India. Those factors are clear to us now. Let us now see what are the factors which are responsible why Portuguese became the first. Before that, a basic timeline. They were the first one to come by 1498. And the earliest area where they settled down was Calicut. The second to come, they were Dutch, and they were able to have their first settlement at Masulipatam. Thereafter, we see the arrival of British. They came, and one of the earliest area where they became the major part, it was Surat. Okay, Surat was the most prominent place, but एक और भी है इनका Masulipatam. ठीक है. Initially, they had tried to build at Surat in 1608, but that part was not successful because of the competition which came from the Portuguese. And the in between there comes the Danish also. Danish mostly आपका इतना books में नहीं दिया होता, but Danish हमें सिर्फ इसलिए याद रखना, they come in between British and French, and they were mostly settled in the area of Tranquebar. They were only focused on one domain, and that was religion. They wanted to have lots of conversion into Christianity. That's why the Danish were not important from political power point of view. They were not having that kind of rivalry with any of the other European power. And the last one to arrive were French. And once the French arrived, eventually their initial settlement was at Surat. So we have to just remember the transition starting with the Portuguese, Dutch, British, Danish, and the last to come is going to be French. Okay. So this is the chronology which you can remember for prelims. Now, why the Portuguese became the first? There were certain factors which were responsible for that. Like we have just seen, the political factors itself. The ruler was a bit interested in this. So here, see in your handout, the rise of strong centralized state or the decline of feudalism, and the kings in the later part of 15th century favored the exploration to Indian subcontinent. And among them, we had the Prince Henry of Portugal. He was given a specific name, the navigator. Somebody who is interested in exploration. So he was having a nickname also, the navigator, for his zeal to find a way to Indian Ocean in order to circumvent Muslim domination of Eastern Mediterranean. Okay. Second, the spirit of religion was also very high in the area of Portugal. The reason was these were Catholic countries. Okay. Catholicism within Christianity we have Catholics. Catholics are the one who completely believe in the era of Pope, his overall his teachings. They did not question him in general. They were more on the conservative side. While later on we'll see the rise of Protestants. These Protestants started questioning the teachings of the Pope as well as the Bible. And most famous personality among them were Martin Luther. Martin Luther became prominent from 1517 onwards. Later on, we'll have John Calvin. So these countries like Spain, Portugal, and even for that matter, French, they were prominent followers of Catholics. While if we see the countries like England, okay, northern part of Germany, they were more followers of Protestants. So religious zeal, it means the aim of these people to spread their religion was very high among the Catholics. In general, they used to see that all the other parts of the world or all the other religions, they are false. And they had to show the light to all the people, all the living beings on the earth. This is how we see the beginning of the theory of white man's burden. कि भाई बाकी इंसानों को कुछ नहीं पता. They have zero progress. All the progress has only happened in Christianity. This is how the religious factors became very prominent. And these people used to believe in that. Okay. Third, this was also the time eventually when India was going through a phase of dissonance. If we see the case of India in the 15th century, northern part it was under the control of Lodhis. Okay, Lodhis were ruling over that area. Then Deccan part, here also Bahmanis were ruling, but they were on the declining spree. So favorable factors were emerging even in the case of India. So if we see largely from the perspective why the Portuguese became first, so वही technology वाला part आ जाएगा. Support from monarchy is going to come as well as the religious zeal. It means that even the monarchy wanted to spread the religions to different parts of the world. So they became the first, and the first eminent personality was Vasco da Gama himself. If we see the case of Portuguese, even before Vasco da Gama, there was a traveler. His name was Bartholomew Diaz. He came to the Cape of Good Hope around 1487, but they were not able to come above that. इसलिए उसका नाम ये रखा Cape of Good Hope कि आगे शायद आगे फ्यूचर में रास्ता मिलेगा. Alright, so he was the first personality, Bartholomew Diaz around 1487. But then it was finally Vasco da Gama. So Vasco da Gama, he traveled on the same route, reached up to the Cape of Good Hope, and finally, with the help of local people, he was able to come towards India. In fact, you can see in your handout there was one Gujarati pilot, or Gujarati pilot in the sense that he was a Gujarati personality, and his name was Abdul Mazid in the Cape of Good Hope. तो अब्दुल जी उनको लेके आ गए. Okay, so nobody remembers the name of Abdul Mazid, but Abdul Mazid helped Vasco da Gama. And that's how the Cape of Good Hope was first reached by Bartholomew Diaz. He reached the same place. वहाँ से उन्होंने ढूंढा. तो वहाँ पे फिर उन्हें मिल गए. तो बोले केम छो इंडिया में, करे मजा में, चलो बैठो लेके चलते हैं. So Gujarati people have played an important role in the arrival of European companies. The western part of India was always having very intense trade with these areas. So that's why it was very common for people from India to have kind of settlements, even in Egypt also, in the area of South Africa also. So Abdul Majid played a very important role. That's how Vasco da Gama came to India. तो स्टोरी याद रखना, प्रीलिम्स में कभी बार ऐसे ही क्वेश्चन आ सकते हैं that Vasco da Gama was the first person to reach Cape of Good Hope. You will become emotional. हाँ इतना तो पता है. It will be wrong. The basic fact is Bartholomew Diaz, and after that Vasco da Gama reached the same place, and from here he took the help of an Indian, okay, a Gujarati person whose name was Abdul Majid. Let us now quickly see the important personalities and their contribution. Come to page number 2. So roughly ये इनका पार्ट था, ठीक है. This is how they were able to come. This is the Cape of Good Hope, ठीक है. यहीं पे आज की डेट में आपका केप टाउन बना हुआ है, केप ऑफ गुड होप से, एंड देन इवेंचुअली केम टुवर्ड दिस एरिया, ठीक है. So let us quickly understand about Vasco da Gama. So he landed at the port of Calicut in May 1498. There the local ruler, he was known as Zamorin. So Zamorin was the title which was taken by the Hindu rulers of Calicut. So that's why we say Zamorin. In his first expedition, he made 60 times of the profit, okay, which was humongous, and this was bound to increase in the coming time. Then he again came for a second trip कि मजा नहीं आया, एक बार फिर से चलते हैं. So he soon realized that monopolistic trade of the Arabs needed to be broken in order to increase the direct trade between India and Europe. And that's why they will come up with various methods. We'll understand those methods like Kafila system, Carta system, blue water policy. Many policies will be established by the Portuguese in order to become the most powerful entity in the area. He used the enmity between the two Hindu rulers of Cochin and Calicut for this purpose, and before he returned, he established a factory or a warehouse in Cochin, and a prison was established at Kannur. Those times factories were not like today कि वहाँ पे machines मिलेंगी for the sake of production, because industrial revolution had not started. So they were more like warehouses for the storage of whatever they wish to trade in. So ये चीज़ ध्यान रखना, कभी कभार कोई conceptual question आ जाए. So before 19th century, we were not having this concept of any kind of factory or production houses. They were more like warehouses, because the majority of the dealing, it used to be initially for the spices between the India and Europe, and then it was textile. That's why remember the background. This is how Vasco da Gama, and through Vasco da Gama, the whole of Portugal realized कि पैसा बनेगा तो इंडिया में ही बनेगा. And this is how the company eventually became prominent, and it came towards India. It also, just like all of us know about the governor generals, yes, prison was established because naturally they were going to be enemies, okay, and they had to build up their political power, and political power can only be built up if you have substantial amount of area under your control. तो उनमें से एक एरिया तो हमेशा prison रहने ही वाला है. Like in India we have तिहाड़ यहाँ पे दिल्ली में, ठीक है. The reason is he wanted to show that the Europeans are powerful, and those who were not going to accept his command can always be put into prison, ठीक है. तो इस तरीके से इन लोगों ने प्रिजन बनाना शुरू किया. दिस सिस्टम वाज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. इनफैक्ट अभी पढ़ेंगे उसी के बारे में ये आपका मिडिएवल इंडिया में भी सेम क्वेश्चन पूछा था जो आपका पोर्चुगीज का है कि हाउ द काटा सिस्टम वाज नथिंग, इट वाज लाइक ए परमिट सिस्टम, ठीक है, इट वाज अ परमिट सिस्टम व्हिच वाज यूज्ड बाय देम एंड दोज हु वर नॉट गोइंग टू एक्सेप्ट इट दे कुड बी पुट इनटू द जेल्स, ठीक है। जैसे हम लोग वो मूवीज है ना आपकी फेमस, दिल चाहता है मूवी देखी है नहीं देखी है, देखनी चाहिए, ठीक है। तो दिल चाहता मूवी में जो फोर्ट होता है आपका गोवा में, दैट वाज आल्सो एस्टैब्लिश्ड बाय द पोर्चुगीज एंड देयर आल्सो दे हैव प्रिजन। आई हैव विजिटेड दैट प्लेस, देखा था प्रिजन जाके, ठीक है। सो प्रिजन इज देयर, prison is always going to be part of these forts were for the what purpose, they were strategic in nature, that they can always defend their area, and the Portuguese were very smart with respect to that. So first important personality is Vasco da Gama, but his role in the later part is very limited. After him the important person will become Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Okay, so see it in your handout also, भी पढ़ेंगे इसके बारे में. So he was the one who negotiated with the Zamorin and obtained permission to establish a factory as well as an overall warehouse in the area. In order to further improve, he dispatched his men on several military missions at the Zamorin's request. So they started supporting the local rulers also to appease them. कि भाई ठीक है, you give us an area where we can get stationed and we are going to help in your military affairs. Then comes a massacre in Calicut. What was this massacre all about? The factory was attacked by Arab Muslims. This was bound to happen. The monopoly of the Arabs in this area was now getting questioned by the Portuguese. So that's why they attacked by the Arab Muslims as well as some of Indian traders, which led to death of more than 50 Portuguese. And this was strongly avenged by them by attacking merchant ships of the Arabs and by bombarding the Calicut area. So the political struggle had started. Look, nothing remains just economical. It becomes political very easily. So once the massacre was started by the indigenous merchants, this was to be countered by the Portuguese. And why they had to counter it? They had to counter it so that nobody does it again. ना एक मैसेज पास ऑन करने वाली बात होती है, लाइक यू सी करंट क्राइसिस व्हिच इज गोइंग ऑन इजराइल एंड पैलेस्टीन. Once the steps were taken by Palestinian Authority which was not in favor of Israel, right now can you see that Israel is not stopping the war? And what's the basic reason behind it? To send a message that you cannot do this in the future. Similar kind of things were even done by the Portuguese in India. So if anybody tried to mess with them, they will try to use as much force was possible. So the second important personality is Pedro Alvarez Cabral. There are some historian viewpoints also. Okay, जब से हम ऑप्शनल में बात करते हैं, आंसर राइटिंग में एक चीज का हमेशा ध्यान रखना है, क्या रखना है? हिस्टोरियोग्राफी. टाइम एंड अगेन वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि किस तरीके से हिस्टोग्राफी यूटिलाइज करना. लाइक देयर इज अ फेमस हिस्टोरियन William Greenlee. So he says that the Portuguese realized that they were few in number and that those who ruled come in India in future fleets would always be at numerical disadvantage. कि जो भी लोग आएंगे इंडिया की बराबरी थोड़ा ना कर सकते पॉपुलेशन में ना 1.4 billion. So that this treachery must be punished in a manner so decisive that the Portuguese would be feared and respected in the future. It was their superior artillery which would enable them to accomplish this end. So he has taken a complete assessment of the initial stage, and in the initial stage what we are able to understand is that Portuguese were harsh from the beginning. They were not going to shy away from the use of force, because force is something which makes you a commendable political power. So first they will use the military, and this military power will be transformed into a political power. Thus they created a precedent for the gunboat diplomacy. This is known as gunboat diplomacy used by European power in Asia during the following centuries. So this is a tradition which was set by them that asks for certain concession from the political power which are in power in India, and thereafter use it for fortification purpose. And if any untoward event happens in which you're losing men or you're losing any of your resources, come up with a very strict reply, a very harsh reply towards your opponent. And this is something which is the assessment of historian William Greenlee. तो इसको हम याद कर लेंगे. कभी भी ऐसा कोई क्वेश्चन आ जाए कि हाउ डिड द Portuguese try to establish themselves in India, like if this kind of a 10 marker question comes, so there in the assessment part you can even mention the opinion of William greenly. तो थोड़ा थोड़ा देखो हिस्टोरियोग्राफी याद रखना सीखना पड़ेगा. There will be many historians which are very simple. जैसे बिपिन चंद्रा हर किसी को याद होता है बिकॉज एनसीईआरटी भी उन्हीं के नाम से. बट बाकी टॉपिक्स पे टॉपिक स्पेसिफिक हिस्टोरियन याद करना बहुत जरूरी है. और द कॉन्टेम्प्ररी कमेंट्स like the person who were creating history in those times, what were they thinking about the event which are bound to happen. So there will be lots of contemporary comments in modern India and the documentation of them is very good. That's why we are able to have first hand understanding of all these events. So I hope you are able to understand why the Portuguese were ferocious during the initial phase. This is the historian view with respect to that. Please come to your handout. First, let us understand very quickly about Vasco da Gama. And then we'll understand about the other personalities which were there in India. So come to page number 2. Vasco da Gama was the first Portuguese to reach Calicut in 1498 with the help of Gujarati person Abdul Majid in the Cape of Good Hope. He was able to find route up to India. Zamorin of Calicut welcomed him because it was more of a entry port. What is the meaning of entry port? Yes, so it is more of a exchange center. An Indian trading system was itself open to all players. On his second visit, he set up a trading factory at Kannur. However, due to his hostility towards Arabic ties ruptured and Zamorin rejected the demand of Portuguese to expel all Arab merchants settled there and to not have any trading relationship with them. This was a constant demand of all the Europeans. सिर्फ हमारे साथ trade करो, बाकी किसी के साथ मत करो. But the Indian people, they were not in favor of this. Because naturally this will again create a monopoly and monopoly is not good for the political power. Okay. As a response to rejection, he set up a number of forts at Cochin, Quilon to dominate the Malabar trade. So forts were created just for this purpose, that even if the indigenous power are not accepting their demands, they can create their own basis and to regularize the trade in the area. So what was the impact of Vasco da Gama's arrival in India? First we have seen this led to the overall profitable enterprise. So the Portugal, they became aware about the ground realities कि कितना profit हो सकता है, and this attracted further attention from the state. Second, they established their Carta system. This Carta system, please remember the keyword Carta system. It was nothing but it was a kind of trading license. This trading license was to be issued by Portuguese. Okay, so Carta system includes a kind of trading license, and if you are not going to purchase, because there is going to be a specific duty, or within the purview of this, you have to pay a percentage of tax, and if you are not paying it, your whole goods which you are carrying in your ship will be declared as contraband. Contraband means illegal trade, and they can use their artillery to even attack you. All the people who will be in the ship, they can be even sold into slavery. So this was a kind of harsh measure. The system is known as Carta system. They developed this system so that they can monopolize the trade of the Arabian Sea. This area can come under their control. And to ensure that this system continues, number one, the ships of the Portuguese, they were always armed. They used the gunboat diplomacy, number one. Second, they established ports around the shore so that all the ships which will come in, they can be checked for their licenses. Like आज की डेट में हमारा क्या होता है, सारे पोर्ट्स पे क्या अपना कस्टम्स वाला क्लियरेंस परमानेंट है और आपको चाहिए ही चाहिए. It can't be that without paying the custom duty you can bring in the goods from the outside. That is not possible. But this is something which was established by the Portuguese. At the area under their control, it is always going to be eventually governed for only one sake, for the creation of monopoly of trade. That's why whenever somebody asks you this question, what were the different steps which were taken by the Portuguese to monopolize the trade? One of the most essential system was काटा system. ठीक है, ये क्वेश्चन एक बार 2014 में पूछा गया था, इन द मिडिएवल, नॉट इन द मॉडर्न पार्ट, बट आप इसको समझ लीजिए. This was the second step which was taken. The Portuguese introduced the Carta system to monopolize the trade of Indian Ocean. This certificate was first issued in 1502. And third, as we have already seen, colonization. The discovery of the sea route opened the way for the age of global imperialism. Now they could capture different areas. The Portuguese did not stop only in India. They went all the way up to Indonesia. Even Indonesia came under the control of Portuguese, which will later be taken away from them by the Dutch. Okay, so the age of global imperialism, this is a very big impact of Vasco da Gama's expedition. इसको हमेशा ध्यान रखना है. Without his expedition, this phase of global imperialism would not have started. Because understand, when you're trying to monopolize the trade of any area, you only get a percentage of profit. But once you have the political power itself, you can collect taxes directly from that population. That's why they thought कि भाई ठीक है सीधा टैक्स ही लेंगे ना, कम प्रॉफिट क्यों ले, let us control all these territories. And to justify it, we'll see, we are creating civilization, we are bringing in the light of the Jesus in the lives of these local people. So all those were justification. But one thing which was common to all these people, it was economic exploitation. And economic exploitation can only increase if they have the political power. The same will be done by the British later on. Initially they went to all the local rulers, give us farman, give us some concessions. But once they were able to win in the Plassey, they used the resources of Bengal itself to fight or control the whole of India. तो इसलिए ये पॉलिटिकल पावर के लिए एम कर रहे थे, बिकॉज वंस यू हैव द पॉलिटिकल पावर इट कैन इवेंचुअली बी ट्रांसफॉर्म इनटू कलेक्शन ऑफ revenue, and this revenue can be sent to the motherland. This is what the Carta system was all about. Let us see the second personality, Francisco de Almeida. So in 1505, King Manuel I of Portugal, he appointed him as the first viceroy of Portuguese India. तो इसको underline कर लो, he was the first viceroy. His primary mission was to bring the spice trade under the control of Portuguese, to build forts along Eastern Africa also. So not only India, also towards the East Africa. Okay, like Mozambique was one of that area which was under the control of Portuguese. Mozambique, the area. Okay, Eastern Africa and Indian coast, to further Portuguese spice trade through alliances with local chieftains, beside constructing the trading post. He strengthened the Portuguese fortification of Fort Manuel in Cochin. Then initially in 1508, the Portuguese were defeated in the Battle of Chol. Please usko underline kar lo, the Battle of Chol, where we see the combined opposition of Arab merchants of Calicut, the sultans of Egypt. Okay, and in this battle, even the son of Almeida died. Later on, by 1509, he avenged the defeat by crushing the fleet of both Sultan of Egypt, Ottoman Empire, as well as the Zamorin of Calicut. Okay, and later on, the Sultan of Gujarat was defeated in the Battle of Tue. And this also established the blue water policy. Blue water policy, it means creation of a naval supremacy. A naval supremacy was to be ensured in the whole of the area, so that this area can come under the complete control of the Portuguese. And they had to oust two specific enemies. One, the Arab merchant. Second, the coming of any other European company. These two were the biggest rival for the Portuguese at this point of time. Okay, yes. Yes, there was also like the slaves. Okay, those were the sultans of Egypt. Then comes the one of the most important personality. The famous mango also comes by the same name, Alfonso. But Alfonso याद रखेंगे, Alfonso de Albuquerque. So he was the most prominent personality which we have among the Portuguese. First is already covered. I hope you can remember the 2-3 point with respect to this. He introduced this permit system. इसको और ज़्यादा strengthen किया इन्होंने कि भाई no ship can go without the permit system. इसको इन्होंने 100% ensure किया. He also defeated Yusuf Adil Khan, the ruler of Bijapur, in this 1510 and captured Goa. These kinds of questions are coming in the prelims. कि कैसे किसने किसको हराया और ये एरिया अपने अंडर कंट्रोल किया. तो लास्ट ईयर उन्होंने आई थिंक दमन दीव के बारे में पूछा था. नेक्स्ट टाइम इट कुड बी गोवा ऑल्सो. सो प्लीज रिमेंबर द नेम ऑफ द पर्सनैलिटी ऑल्सो. Okay, and from whom the Goa was taken by them. He developed Goa into a center of commerce by making all the ships sails on that route. And from 1510 onwards, Goa had become the epicenter of the Portuguese politics. He also captured Malacca as well as Ceylon, means Sri Lanka. Both of them, the Malacca state, this area was controlled by him. Built a fort also at Calicut, and certain social reforms were done, like the abolition of sati. I hope all of you know that in Goa we have a which code? A civil code is there. Okay, civil code, and this civil code was established by the Portuguese. So certain social reforms were brought by them at this time also. Very famous new things were brought in, like the initial coming of printing press. Many new crops, they were also brought by the Portuguese. I hope all of you know about them. Famous among them includes पोटैटो, टोबैको, टोमेटो, हर चीज़ के जिसके आगे ओ है वो सब कौन लेके आए हैं? पोर्चुगीज. पोर्चुगीज with respect to Latin America, they were very prominent in Brazil, and many of the indigenous crops of South America, they were brought to India by them. He was the second governor, one of the most prominent personality. Then Nino da Cunha, he was the one who shifted his headquarters from Cochin to Goa, and he also acquired Diu and Basin from Bahadur Shah of Gujarat. This was the question which was asked last year prelims में. तो थोड़े facts आपको याद रखने पड़ेंगे. One theme which we teach in the prelims, it is the theme of the arrival of Europeans. और यहाँ से question हर साल आता है. जैसे कि एक दो बार question ये पूछा है कि what was the first factory which was established by the British. Such factual questions are coming from these topics. So not only for your optional, it is very important for optional, but at the same time for your prelims, basic facts are becoming important. The initial settlements on west coast include Daman, Salsette as well as Bombay, and the east coast we have Saint Thom in Madras as well as Hooghly. What were the gifts to India? So cultivation of tobacco, potato, first printing press, this was brought in India by them. Why printing press is important? Because this has played a very important role in the creation of modern India. Look, it is very difficult, okay, to have those manuscripts written. How many people can it reach? If you want a very high reach, you require printing press. Today it's very easy for us. यहाँ लो handout ले लो. कहाँ से आता है? Printing press. So all the literature, all those things now can be produced on large scale, and that's why the bringing in of printing press in India is also one of the element of modernism, which will ensure that the ideas of one personality can reach the others. Once the printing press came in the future, this opened the path for newspapers. है ना, आज की डेट में तो बड़ा आसान है, ठीक है, न्यूज़पेपर you get the overall headlines of whatever is happening in India as well as the world, but in those times it was not there. So that's why printing press is very, very important for us. Later on, if we see the major time period during which they became very prominent in India, it includes only the 16th century. By the early 17th century, they had lost all of their power. Like they lost Hooghly, then they also gave Bombay as a gift to Charles II of England. पूरा बॉम्बे इन्होंने डॉवरी में दे दिया, ठीक है? The whole Bombay was given in dowry, and from the crown of England, this was given to East India Company. And finally, the Marathas captured Salsette and Basin. So it became a weak power by the early 17th century, and by the 18th century, it was completely gone. Only the area which remained under their control were left by the British, and they also agreed that they will not go for any kind of military or political strategy after that. So that's why we have to remember few things about the Portuguese. Who are the initial important personalities? What was their contribution? That's it. What were the steps which were taken by them in order to create a sense of monopoly in the region? बस इतना हमने पार्ट इनके बारे में पढ़ना है, बाकी सब तो फिर हमारे लिए आसान ही है. Kindly see your handout, page number 3. Priyanka, the Sultan of Egypt, okay, that came in the, because even the area which was under their control, Portuguese were trying to reach that. All right, this was the major reason why they came in the conflict. These are not mentioned Weber because as such आपके मेंस के लिए काम का नहीं है ये सब, ये प्रीलिम्स के लिए पीपीटी आपके साथ शेयर कर देंगे, तो जब आप प्रीलिम्स वगैरह के लिए रिवीजन करोगे तो इसको साथ में एक बार सामने रख लेना, ठीक है। इससे मेंस में आपका आज तक एक भी क्वेश्चन नहीं आया है फ्रॉम मॉडर्न पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू। अब सिलेबस में आपका पहला टॉपिक है बट नहीं पूछ रहे तो हम लोग क्या कर सकते हैं, ठीक है। वी कैन ओनली गिव यू द राइट इन्फॉर्मेशन, बट ठीक है, थोड़ा सा इसको याद कर लेना है, दैट्स इट। प्रीलिम्स के लिए ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, आपका मेंस में इतना काम का नहीं है। मेंस में अगर क्वेश्चन आएगा तो ये इनिशियल अल्फोंसो डी अल्बर, क्योंकि ही रिमेन्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पर्सनैलिटी। सी द फ्यू मोर पॉइंट्स फ्रॉम द हैंड आउट, ठीक है। इसको स्टार मार्क भी कर लीजिए, अगर क्वेश्चन आएगा तो इनके ऊपर आ सकता है। He is considered the real founder of Portuguese power. Why real founder? Because he was able to establish strategic control of the Indian Ocean by creating stronghold in East Africa, Red Sea, as well as Malabar and Malacca. He served as Governor General from 1509 to 1515, during which he expanded the influence across the Indian Ocean and built a reputation as a fierce and skilled military commander. He also strengthened the forts within his dominion. That was the second part, which was very much linked to his acquisition of power. Third, he acquired Goa from Bijapur in 1510, followed by the Malacca area in 1511. And this acquisition of Goa was very important for them. Why? Natural harbor as well as a fort could be created. Second, it was also going to create a very big pressure on the Gujarat seaport, because as you can see, Malabar बहुत south में हो जाता है. They required an area which was in the middle, from which they can even control the area of Gujarat. So that's why the area of north or the part of our Indian coastline can be easily covered from this area. And further, he established diplomatic relationship with Vijayanagar, okay, Vijayanagar के साथ भी बना, and then even the other territories like that of Thailand, Myanmar, Ethiopia. So in a way, he was able to create a very lasting relationship for the Portuguese, which can further increase their trade and commerce. लास्ट में आपको बस एक कंपाइल कर दिया है, which were the factors which were used by the Portuguese to establish their control. So what are those factors? Number one is Carta system. Carta system nothing but a type of trading license. ठीक है, trading license की तरह याद करेंगे, which was used by them to control all the trade in the area. Second, Kafila system. I hope all of you understand the meaning of the word Kafila. Kafila means going in the groups. So Kafila system was nothing but, you can see, it was a new instrument of trading control. This consists of a convoy of small local merchant ship guarded by Portuguese fleet. As we can see even in the current affairs, this area is still affected by piracy. So if you want to be free from piracy, you require somebody's help. And in this case, this used to be the Portuguese fleet. So this is what is known as the Kafila system. Third, it is the blue water policy, as we have already seen, in which they used to go to the high lines, creating strategic places along the coastline. Surveillance was done by the vessels, as well as insistence on taking the passes. Okay, so this whole is also known as blue water policy. And finally, the factory system. So these were fortified center to serve to check the movements of vessel owned by the others, and to function as an area of reserve of military as well as naval forces. Plus even the produce could be stored in this area. So उसके लिए भी they used to use the factory system. So अगर ऐसा कोई question आ जाए on the Portuguese कि what were the different methods which were used by them to create a monopoly for trading, तो ये चार के चार part आपने लिखने हैं इसके अंदर. Yes. साइमल्टेनियसली चल रहे हैं, डिफरेंट मेथड्स यूज कर रहे हैं ना. एक में है कि ट्रेड के लिए लाइसेंस ले लो. सेकंड दे विल से चलो ठीक है आपको प्रोटेक्शन भी चाहिए तो ठीक है काफिला सिस्टम का पार्ट बन जाओ. लाइक इफ यू आर एन इंडिपेंडेंट ट्रेडर and you want to take a ship from India all the way up to Africa or even beyond, so if you say कि भाई नहीं I need protection, so you can become part of Kafila system. And in this Kafila system, some of the Portuguese ships are going to go along with your ships. अब ऐसा नहीं कि एक शिप के साथ जाते थे. There could be suppose 100 merchant ships and with that there could be 5 or 10 ships of the Portuguese. So in a way they were trying to become the policeman of the area. ठीक है कि भाई हम security provide करेंगे. Why security was required? Because look, the Portuguese, they were very adept. They were very adept in the blue water. So that's why some of Indian dynasties also, including the Mughals later on, they will give a kind of encouragement to the pirates कि लूट लो इन लोगों को. ठीक है, because we do not have the navy, we cannot compete. But some of the pirates, they were given the free hand by the various local rulers. That's why the Portuguese had to come up with the काफिला system. तो वो देखो वो तो चलता रहेगा ना ऐसे कि if somebody is going to dominate over the sea, some counter measures will be taken. Like why these various sultans of Egypt etc. are meddling in this issue? Because the whole area up to Red Sea, the Portuguese tried to control that area because this was very vital area. Okay, this was very vital area for trade and commerce. Let us come to page number 4. Let us see the relation with the natives. So with the Deccan Sultan and Vijayanagar, they were having relatively love and hate relation. कभी उनके साथ लड़ाई होती थी, कभी उनके साथ में trading relationship. Like if we see Alfonso, he had direct contact with Krishna Deva Rai and supplied good quality horses. Okay, with the Bijapur, we have just seen in 1510 they had captured Goa. The Portuguese had a role to play in the successive battles of the balance of power between both Vijayanagar as well as Deccan Sultan. Relation with Mughals, so they established the relationship from 1517 onwards. Efforts were made, okay, to make Chittagong the chief port of Bengal. Some of the missions, okay, or the religious missions, like you can underline Rodolphe Aquaviva as well as Antonio Montserrat. They both went to the court of Akbar, and eventually they were allowed to even convert the royal house city people or royal house subjects. And finally, if you see with respect to southern area, so Raja of Cochin was associated with the Portuguese in order to increase his own power in relation to the overlord, that is Zamorin of Calicut. So depending upon the situation, the Portuguese kept on playing with the various local powers. Later on, you can just add this that from 1630 to beginning of 18th century, they lost to different powers. They lost to British, they lost to even the Marathas. So, what were the factors which went into the decline of Portuguese? तो यही सारे factors आएंगे. Like number one, if we see at the top, the nature of the Portuguese enterprise itself. They did not create a kind of system in which everybody could enjoy, in which everybody could become part of the trading system. What did they do? They tried to establish monopoly, which created friction with the Arab merchant, which created friction with Indian merchants, and this became a perpetual battle. The Portuguese will try to establish the monopoly, but this will be countered by the Indian traders as well as the Arab merchants. Second, the political factors within the Europe. This is very, very important. Portuguese succession crisis started from 1580, and as a result of this, Portuguese, they started suffering in India also. So local factors in Europe always used to affect their fortunes in India. ये same चीज Dutch के साथ भी होगी. ठीक है? Like this is very important. Please underline it and remember it. Succession crisis starts from 1580, and that's why the Portuguese misadventure of taking part in this Anglo-Spanish war eventually led to the decline. In India, they started war against British East India Company in 1612, 14 and Dutch in 1625, but were defeated thoroughly. So both coming of Dutch as well as British affected the status of the Portuguese in India. Leakages in monopoly system, so they were never able to establish complete monopoly. So that was also one of the reasons why it was easy to replace them in the later years. And other factors like we have seen, these are very important. They used to force conversions. That's why people in their area never liked the religious policies. So we have to remember the religious policy gave rise to political fears. The Portuguese policy of conversion to Christianity made Indians resentful. Second, discovery of new lands. So they started focusing on the area of Brazil. So their attention got divided as a result of this. And third, proliferation of sea route as well as technologies. Previously, these technologies were known to majority of the Portuguese, but now they become common to all of Europe. And even better ships were built by the Dutch later on. Better ships. even in terms of armory also Dutch became better than the Portuguese later on. So because of all these factors, we see the decline of Portugal in India. So nature of Portugal enterprise, the political factors in the Europe itself, religious policy, discovery of new land which divided their attention, and finally the proliferation of the sea route as well as the टेक्नोलॉजी एवरीबडी न्यू कि आप पहले केप ऑफ गुड होप तक जाएंगे, फिर वहां से कहाँ जाएंगे, इंडिया जाएंगे. सो ऑल दोज इंफॉर्मेशन विच वॉज नाउ कंट्रोल्ड बाय द पोर्चुगीज ड्यूरिंग द 16th century became available to all the others. Okay, and this is the reason eventually we have to see that the Portuguese were bound to decline. But the whole phase, if we see their contribution, what is the contribution that we see? Number one, it marked the emergence of naval power. Okay, so politically it became relevant that those who will have a very strong navy is going to rule the future. That is first trend which we can see from the Portuguese. Second, for the first time in the history of international trade, commercial treaties were signed with the Indian rulers. So these were something new. As such, कोई ऐसे treaties नहीं sign करता था. But this was the time when the treaties were signed with the local rulers. Social sphere, like we have already seen, missionary activity they started, converted many Hindus as well as Muslims. Portuguese also gave patronage to various painters, artists, sculptors, and creation of large number of churches. This is known as Iberian architecture. Okay, we have many churches in Goa. So those churches were built by the Portuguese. Okay, so they became a center of elaborate work, foliage work as well as the metal work. So many various kinds of artists could stay. New crops, tobacco, cashew nuts, tomato, ये सारी क्रॉप्स कहाँ से स्टार्ट हुई हैं, यहीं से. एंड दे ब्रॉट इट फ्रॉम वेयर, yes, Latin America. Along with this, plantation agriculture became prominent. Technology wise, in terms of military technology, the system of drilling groups of infantries, which was based on Spanish model, was introduced. Shipping, they constructed multi-decked ships in India. These were the various territories which were under their control. Okay, बहुत सारी है, but most strategic is Goa. Goa is the most strategic, as we can see from this, that initially they were centered further south here, but now once they come to this area, they can easily control this area also. Diu became prominent here. Daman, Dadra and Nagar Haveli. Dadra and Nagar Haveli belong to which power? सब लोग कॉलेज में कुछ पढ़ाई किया है कि नहीं किया, ये तो 10th 11th वाली हिस्ट्री है. एनीवे, तो ये हमें इसलिए याद रखना है बिकॉज यूपीएससी इज आस्किंग सच क्वेश्चंस इन प्रीलिम्स. तो कौन कौन सी टेरिटरी पे इनका एरिया इनके अंडर कंट्रोल में था, तो हमें थोड़ा सा पता होना चाहिए. बट लार्जली इफ यू सी फ्रॉम मेन्स पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, so they can ask 3-4 questions. Like first question we have already seen, what were the factors why the European came towards India? That could be one question. Second, what was the contribution of early Portugal leaders, which will include Vasco da Gama, Almeida, Alfonso, in the establishment of the Portugal control in India? That could be second question. Third question which may be asked, it's about their decline or the efforts or the steps which were taken by the Portuguese in the establishment of their power in India, which we have discussed about Kata system, Kafila system, blue water policy as well as the overall factory system. All those systems which were used by them, there can be one question even on their decline. तो ये 4-5 एरियाज बनते हैं इस टॉपिक पे जहाँ से आपको क्वेश्चन मिल सकता है. अभी सो फार वी हैव 0 क्वेश्चंस टू शो फॉर दिस, तो अभी के लिए कुछ हमारे पास है नहीं. These we have already discussed, methods which are used by them, Katas, Kafila and factory system. ठीक है. So after this, the second company that we have is Dutch. Dutch were somebody who were learning from the Portuguese. Okay, they were learning from them, and at the same time they came up with further innovations. So please see page number 5 of your handout. एक बार उसको read करो, the introductory part. You have to remember some very prominent part with respect to Dutch. Sumedh, in the case of Portuguese, it was under the control of the state itself. State was the one. जो प्राइवेट वाला जो सिस्टम है, it will be started by the Dutch. ठीक है? The Dutch was the one of the first companies in the whole of the world which was based upon shareholder model. Shareholder model का मतलब क्या होता है? What is the meaning of a shareholder? प्राइवेट तो समझ में आ गया, लेकिन like normally what happens if a company is there? Yes, so it depends upon the ownership structure. Like those who are having the maximum share, those who are also very key personality with respect to the governance, they are known as promoters. Okay, like अगर हम बात करें किसी भी एक कंपनी का, जैसे इन्फोसिस देख लो, ठीक है, तो इन्फोसिस में वी हैव सर्टेन promoters, so they will have a percentage of ownership. This ownership depends upon कितना वो रखना चाहते हैं अपने पास, कितना वो सेल करना चाहते हैं. तो what is going to happen, like suppose if a company is divided into 1000 shares, every share will have a specific price. It could be 10 rupees, it could be 100 rupees, it could be depending upon, like suppose if we say 5000 rupee is the price of one share and 1000 are the overall share in which the company is divided. I'm just taking a hypothetical example. So if you want to invest in this company, you can buy a certain percentage of shares from the promoters. That's why this was a shareholder model in which you can purchase, in which you can become a percentage of owner. तो इसमें दो वर्ड जो होते हैं, एक शेयर होल्डर होता है, एक होता है स्टेक होल्डर. स्टेक होल्डर इज द वर्ड विच इज यूज फॉर दोज पीपल हु हैव मोर देन 1% ऑफ द ओनरशिप ऑफ द कंपनी. उनको क्या बोलते हैं? स्टेक होल्डर. एंड दोज हु आर हैविंग अ वेरी लेस परसेंटेज, कुछ ही शेयर हैं आपके पास, यू विल बी नोन एज अ शेयर होल्डर. दिस इज द शेयर होल्डर मॉडल. तो फायदा क्या होता है शेयर होल्डर मॉडल का? You can raise capital from the market. You can raise capital. अब आज की डेट में आप देख रहे हो कितने सारे IPO आ रहे हैं. Initial public offering. So what is the meaning of IPO? It just what it does, they will offload certain percentage of the share of the company, and those share will be eventually purchased by the investor. An investor could be retail investor like you and me, जिनके पास थोड़ा बहुत है, 14, 15, 20 हज़ार रुपये लगा दिया. There could be बिग इन्वेस्टर क्या बोलते हैं? NII. और जो सबसे बड़ा इन्वेस्टर होते हैं क्या बोलते हैं? QIBs, क्वालिफाइड इंस्टीट्यूशनल बायर्स. जैसे कि इसमें बड़े बड़े बैंक्स वगैरह आते हैं जो बल्क में परचेज करते हैं. वो ऐसा नहीं कि 10-15 शेयर लेके खुश होकर बैठे हुए हैं. दिस इज नॉट हाउ इट इज. तो this was the shareholder model, and this was the first company. In fact, all of you also know this first stock exchange in the world. This was also established in Dutch. फर्स्ट स्टॉक एक्सचेंज वहीं पे एस्टैब्लिश हुई थी कि इस कंपनी के जो शेयर हैं, द प्राइस इज गोइंग टू चेंज डिपेंडिंग अपॉन व्हाट? डिपेंडिंग अपॉन देयर परफॉर्मेंस, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द सेंटिमेंट्स ऑफ द पीपल. सो ये इसके लिए स्टॉक एक्सचेंज होता है, बिकॉज एक बार कंपनी वहाँ पे लिस्ट हो गई तो यू कैन बाय द शेयर्स डायरेक्टली फ्रॉम द मार्केट. यू डोंट हैव टू रीच द प्रमोटर कि मुझे कुछ शेयर्स खरीदने हैं. यू कैन डायरेक्टली गो टू द एक्सचेंज. दैट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन लिस्टेड एंड अनलिस्टेड कंपनी. जैसे आज की डेट में पेटीएम अब लिस्टेड कंपनी है. इफ यू वांट टू परचेज सम शेयर, डायरेक्टली गो टू NSE और BSE, किसी भी आपने डीमैट अकाउंट खोल लें, यू हैव टू गेट द फंड्स और उसको आप परचेज कर सकते हो. बट इफ देयर इज अ कंपनी विच इज अनलिस्टेड, जो कि एक्सचेंज पे लिस्टेड नहीं है आज की डेट में, देन यू हैव टू रीच दैट कंपनी इटसेल्फ, या कौन उनके बिहाफ पे प्राइवेट इक्विटी सेल कर रहा है आज की डेट में. So that is how the difference is. But anyway, let us understand some basic things about the Dutch. So by the closing of 16th century, the Portuguese were not able to fulfill the demand of European market, okay, for spices. This led to sharp increase in prices, and in order to counter this, they started exploring the distant lands. In 1594, the Dutch Company of Distant Lands was established, and the primary motive was to challenge the Portugal's मोनोपोली इन पेपर ट्रेड. तो सारी कहानी घूम फिर के पेपर के ऊपर आकर रुक जाती. ठीक है. Then we see the arrival of the first Dutch fleet of Jacob van Neck to the Spice Island, Indonesia in 1599. Dutch government had realized the profits involved in the trade. In 1602, they created a company by consolidating all the competing Dutch trading companies on the lines of British India Company, and this company was called United East India Company or VOC, and later on it came to be known as Dutch East India Company. This was granted monopoly rights over trade in Asia. ठीक है, तो इस तरीके से डच consolidated their specific company. Let us try to understand what steps were taken by them. So this, the first step is this itself, the Dutch company of distance land. First expedition was led by a trader known as Van Lichtenstein. Later on, the first fleet, official fleet, it came under the rule of Jacob van Neck. And finally, by 1602, all the companies, all the different companies, they were merged down, and the overall monopoly to trade with this was given to this one specific part. Then the areas which came under their control initially, like one of the earliest area was Pulicat. Please remember it. Pulicat is one of the most important area under the control of Dutch. This built their castle known as Gladria, and this served as their headquarter of Dutch East India Company. Okay. They also established their control over Masulipatam in 1605, and they established their settlement, okay, later on at Pulicat in 1610. The other areas or the fort possession includes Nagapattinam, Porto Novo, ठीक है, और इतना important नहीं है. Diamonds were exported from Pulicat to West countries. Gunpowder factory was also established to augment their military power. So this was the initial setup. Okay, so Pulicat becomes the epicenter of the initial Dutch power. That is something which we have to remember. They were involved in slave trade also. People from Bengal and from settlements such as Tingapattinam as well as Karaikal, they were brought to Pulicat, and the Dutch employed brokered at Madras for catching and fishing, shipping slaves. So this is how they started conducting business in India. Specific places were put by them. Pepper remains a ubiquitous part, है ना, कि spices तो करना ही करना है trade. Along with that, they became interested in the trading of diamonds as well as the slaves. This is the chronology which we have to remember. 1602 VOC, or the first multinational corporation, the first company to issue stocks, that somebody can come and purchase our ownership, and if we will have profit, we will give dividends to you on the basis of your ownership. Dividend क्या होता है? Like suppose if a country, थोड़ा इकोनॉमिक्स भी पढ़ना पड़ेगा साथ में तुम लोगों को, ठीक है? Like if suppose a company has a profit of 100 crore, okay, so it realizes that we require only 50 crore for the future expansion, या future में इतना ही हमको requirement है, तो they are left with how much? 50 crores. तो 50 crores में से डिसाइड करेंगे कि इतने में से कुछ रिजर्व में चला जाएगा. Like suppose they may take 10 CR into reserve, 40 CR किस में चला जाएगा? Distribution of dividend. So depending upon the number of shares this company have, 40 crores will be divided. तो जो भी शेयर होल्डर्स होते हैं उनके साथ क्या शेयर किया जाता है? डिविडेंड. Dividend only comes when there is profit. A loss making company will not give you dividend. ठीक है, इसलिए शेयर मार्केट यही है ना. When somebody says कि डेट में पैसा लेना है, डेट में you have to always give the money back at an interest. But when it comes to shares, चाहे आपका प्रॉफिट हो चाहे आपका लॉस हो, you are a partner in both. तो ये बस ध्यान रखना प्रीलिम्स में. Anyway, so in 1602 they were the first one to issue stocks. 1605 first factory at Masulipatam. Other factories, Pulicat became the headquarter. Fort Gladria, Chinsura, you have to remember. Chinsura was another major center. Kasim Bazar, Patna, Balasore as well as Surat dislodged the Portuguese from India's maritime trade. They became the premier exporter of Indian textile. They also conquered Java. Java was conquered by 1623. They lost their settlements to British later on in the famous Battle of Chinsura. This battle we'll discuss later on after the Battle of Plassey. After the Battle of Plassey, when Mir Jafar came to power, he was so fed up with the British, he eventually approached the Dutch. The Dutch helped him, but they still got lost in the Battle of Chinsura. And thereafter, they decided that we have to change the Nawab. And thereafter, we see the establishment by 1760, Mir Kazim was brought in. Mir Kazim himself has its own plans. This is how the chronology went for the Dutch. Okay? So, Dutch, if we see, the epicenter remains towards the east. Now we quickly see the relationship. So if we see the relation with Mughals, you can see they became successful in getting the farman from Jahangir. They were exempted from tolls from Burhanpur to Cambay as well as Ahmedabad. Shah Jahan also gave them two farmans, the permission to trade in Bengal as well as Surat. If we see at Calicut, they were able to secure monopoly rights from the indigenous ruler. Like in 1710, Zamrin of Calicut was forced to sign the treaty of giving sole trading right to Dutch and expelling other European traders. Relation with Golconda. The Dutch got favorable response from rulers of Golconda. They granted them concessions of trade on payment of 4% custom duty on import and export. And relation with Tanjore, 1690, the Nayaks allowed them to pay only half of the toll in parts of kingdom. They also got the right to keep other European out from the ports of Tanjore. These were the relationship with the native state. Point number 3, you can star mark it. This was asked by UPSC in prelims 2020. क्वेश्चन पूछा गया था दैट गोलकोंडा के साथ किस कंपनी ने आके स्पेसिफिकली साइन किया था, तो वहाँ पे ये पूछा गया था विद रिस्पेक्ट टू डच. ठीक है. सो ये कुछ जो बहुत फैक्चुअल इन्फॉर्मेशन है ये आपको प्रीलिम्स के लिए ज़्यादा याद रखनी है देन फॉर योर ऑप्शनल, बिकॉज ऑप्शनल में तो मैंने आपको बता ही दिया. सो फार वी हैड 0 क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम पोर्चुगीज एंड डच. सो एज सच उसके लिए उतना इंपॉर्टेंट आज तक तो नहीं हुआ है. इन द फ्यूचर क्वेश्चन मे कम, बट फॉर दैट ऑल्सो यू हैव टू इंश्योर कौन सी स्पेसिफिक चीज़ें आने वाली है. Let us see the comparative advantages of the Dutch to the Portuguese. Why the Dutch became prominent, okay, in comparison to them. Number 1, very easy business organization. Okay, the Dutch was a kind of precursor to the modern age corporation. It was based on shareholder model. These shareholders were important to the success of East India Company, and as a result of this, they were having easy access to finance. है ना, कोई आपके शेयर खरीद लेगा तो पैसा तो आएगा ही ना कंपनी के पास में. This is how it was easy access to finance. Second, shipping technology. So they built these shipping technology which is known as fluid ship, okay, which became a masterpiece in the 17th century. And they needed a small crew to operate, and thus it reduced the operating cost. जो आपकी जो ships थी of the Portuguese, they were bulky. They required a very big crew. है ना, आपने देखा होगा movies वगैरह में कि how the previous ships used to run. So those were bulky, but the Dutch, they were very swift, okay, and eventually these ships proved to be superior to the bulkier and the slower Portuguese ships. दो एक इनके पास major advantage आ गई. Number 1, they required a small crew. Second, it could go a bit faster. Okay, so slower Portuguese ships, they were not able to compete with the Dutch ship in the 17th century. Again, as we have already seen, the Dutch were Protestants, so their religious policy was liberal in nature in comparison to the Portuguese, because Portuguese, wherever they go, they will always go for the conversions, and that is something which was not done by the Dutch. So you can see that they were Protestant and different from Catholic Portuguese. Therefore, unlike the Portuguese, they were not staunch propagators of their faith. They didn't try to convert the indigenous people to Christianity. This is very important point, because religious freedom is something which is liked by every community. You should not interfere in that. Access to resources, so they also had access to gold from Africa. This further utilized to finance their trade in East Asia. An extent of control and operation. So with the period of time, they were able to create their supremacy around Coromandel coast as well as Southeast Asian market. All these Southeast Asian market, which includes Indonesia largely, this was won by them from the Portuguese. So last में Dutch का जो last area रहेगा, which will be under their control, it will be Indonesia. So वो आपको ध्यान रखना है अभी से. While the Portuguese were confined basically to southwest coast of India in 16th century, Dutch expanded the trading network to Coromandel coast, Bengal as well as Gujarat. But later on, they will also decline. And what are the factors which are responsible for their decline? That is something which we have to see. Okay. Like number 1, it's the change in trade profitability. That the area in which they were entering in. Okay, so they were mostly entering in. The importance of pepper and spice declined later on from India to Europe, while the share of textile and raw silk it was increasing, and as a result of this, the profitability of their trade started declining. तो ये इनका major factor था. It affected their revenues. Second, it was the entry of other European power. Mostly we see the coming of English, and later we see the coming of French, and these two will become the major powers later on. Third, wars in India. So Dutch lost to one of the local regional power in the Battle of Kulachal and they were defeated by Raja Martand Varma. So once the Dutch were defeated by the local power, there was no looking back. Because अगर local power भी आपको defeat कर दे रही है, तो it means you are not powerful. That is very clear. So in this case, Travancore was the princely state. We'll talk about it a bit later on. This was able to defeat them. And finally, politics at home. Just like Portuguese, who suffered as a result of the succession crisis. Here also there were wars which were going on. And later on, Dutch were able to create a kind of pact with British. The Dutch said, हमें spice trade चाहिए and we are going to go towards East Indies. British said कि ठीक है, gentlemen, we are going to go to India. Give us this place. We want this area. So eventually the English took trade of textile while the Dutch took the part of spice. That's why they became more interested in Southeast Asia, and the British became more important in the case of us. And all these factors were responsible for decline of Dutch. Again, we have not seen any question from the Dutch also. What I would like eventually, कि इस पे भी एक क्वेश्चन लिख लेते हैं, इसको भी कल आप लिख के लेके आना. We'll discuss it tomorrow. Highlight the factors responsible for the rise of Dutch in India. Comment on their relationship with local Indian powers. So this will be like a 10 marker question. Two segmented parts are there. In the first page, you will talk about the factors which are responsible for their rise. Second part, you will comment about their relationship with the local Indian powers. Okay? So दो पार्ट में आप इसको करेंगे. Yes. हाँ, सारे आ जाएंगे किसी के साथ भी. जैसे गोलकोंडा के साथ क्या था, मुगल्स के साथ क्या था. इनफैक्ट मर्तान वर्मा वाला पॉइंट भी लिख सकते हो. Local powers doesn't mean, local means native powers. Native power could be a regional power, it could be a all India power, doesn't matter. ठीक है, तो local का मतलब है indigenous. लोकल इसलिए वर्ड यूज किया गया बिकॉज आपको रिलेशनशिप विद द ब्रिटिश नहीं बताना है, विद द पोर्चुगीज नहीं बताना है, किसके साथ बताना है, इंडियन के पावर साथ बताना है. इसलिए वहां पे लोकल इंडियन पावर, बिकॉज इंडिया में तो लास्ट में ये भी पावर्स बन गई थी, इसलिए वर्ड क्या यूज किया है, लोकल. तो देखो थोड़ा सा इंटरप्रिटेशन का ध्यान रखना पड़ेगा एग्जाम के लिए. ठीक है, अगेन 10 मार्कर, प्लीज राइट इट डाउन. या अभी लिखोगे? अभी देखते हैं आप लोगों की अप्रोच. सर घर पे बहुत अच्छा होता है ना. आई गेट इनटू माय डिवाइन फॉर्म एंड राइट सच एन इंट्रोडक्शन एंड वो दिखेगा भी नहीं कल आपको, है ना. एनीवे, चलो कल लिख लेना. आज पहला दिन है पढ़ाई का, तो बुरा नहीं फील कराएंगे आज, कल से कराएंगे कि लिख के नहीं लेके आए, क्या किया क्या नहीं किया. बट मेक श्योर, लुक, ऑल ऑफ यू वांट टू क्लियर दिस एग्जाम और नॉट. बहुत बहुत वो हाँ तो हमेशा हाँ होती है, यहाँ भी हाँ करना सीखो. या आप लोगों के भलाई के लिए आंसर राइटिंग जितना जल्दी सीखोगे सेम चीज़ें आपको जनरल स्टडीज़ में भी अच्छे से आ जाएंगी। और जैसे एक बार आंसर राइटिंग समझ में आ गई देन इवेंचुअली फिर तो कहानी ख़त्म है। इस एग्ज़ाम में सबसे डिफ़िकल्ट फेज देखो मेंस है। क्यों? वहाँ जिसके मार्क्स नहीं आते, या तो इंटरव्यू कॉल नहीं आता या फिर 1-2 मार्क्स से इंटरव्यू कॉल आता है, और जो 1-2 10 मार्क्स से कट ऑफ से ज़्यादा ऊपर नंबर नहीं होंगे, देखो सिलेक्शन नहीं होता है। बी वेरी क्लियर विद इट। बहुत लोग टाइल पहन के अभी घूम रहे होंगे यूपीएससी, ठीक है, बट नहीं होगा सिलेक्शन फाइनली। क्यों? क्या नहीं आता था अच्छे से? आंसर राइटिंग। Many of my friends, they gave 4 interviews. The 4 interviews, you will say they were unlucky. I will say they were not able to get the right kind of marks in the mains. Because mains में अगर आपके कट ऑफ से 40-50 नंबर ऊपर है, you become invincible. दे दो कितना भी मार्क्स, रैंक तो आएगा. And this is what you should also look for. Whichever category you're writing this exam in, make sure उसके कट ऑफ से हम 40-50 नंबर ऊपर रहें. और वो 40-50 नंबर ऊपर कब आएगा? जब आप लिखेंगे. बिकॉज मैनी स्टूडेंट्स व्हाट हैपेंस टू देम, सिर्फ पीटी और मेंस के बीच में ही आंसर राइटिंग करेंगे, वो फिर कम पड़ जाता है काफ़ी टाइम. तो अनलकी अननेसेसरी नहीं बनना है. कुछ उसमें आपका हार्डवर्क का भी दिक्कत आता है, क्योंकि तो 2 नंबर से ऊपर 2 नंबर नीचे यही घूमता रहता है बहुत लोगों के साथ में. बाद में सब बाहर वाले को परसेप्शन क्या लगता है? अनलकी. इट हैज़ अ वेरी स्ट्रेटेजिक डिफ़ॉल्ट. वो स्ट्रेटेजिक डिफ़ॉल्ट यही है कि आपने ठीक से आंसर राइटिंग पे मेहनत नहीं करी है. फिर इसकी वजह से देखो यही चैलेंजेस होते हैं. इंट्रोडक्शन ठीक से नहीं लिख पाना, स्ट्रक्चरिंग ठीक से ना आना, कंक्लूजन टाइम पे नहीं कर पाना, टाइम मैनेजमेंट नहीं होना, यही सब चैलेंजेस रहेंगे आप सब लोगों के पास में. कोई नया चैलेंज नहीं आएगा आपके लिए, यही रहेगा. द सेम विच यू आर सीइंग टुडे, इट विल बी इन द फाइनल एग्जाम हॉल ऑल्सो. इंटरप्रिटेशनल इश्यूज कि व्हाट आई शुड राइट, व्हाट आई शुड नॉट राइट हेयर, कीवर्ड्स कितना इंक्लूड करना है, हिस्टोग्राफी कितना इंक्लूड करना है, यही सब चैलेंजेस हम लोगों के सामने. तो आप लोग जितना ज़्यादा आंसर राइटिंग करते जाएंगे, हमें भी इंसेंटिव मिलता है कि हाँ चलो ठीक है, आप 2 क्वेश्चन लिखे, 2 और लो नेक्स्ट क्लास में. एंड आप लोग भी इस तरीके से सीखोगे. और ये सोचो ना, अगर हम 20-25 क्लासेस ले रहे हैं मॉडर्न इंडिया के, तो आराम से 40-50 क्वेश्चन तो क्लास में कर सकते हैं कि नहीं कर सकते. बट यू हैव टू शो द पार्टिसिपेशन, है ना. तो पार्टिसिपेट करेंगे और कल आप इसको करके लाएंगे. आज यहीं पे रुकते हैं, बिकॉज नेक्स्ट जो टॉपिक है इट रिक्वायर्स अनदर 1.5 आवर. आज का हमारा मेजर फोकस किस पे था? पोर्चुगीज एंड डच, द अर्ली पावर्स. दीज वर द अर्ली पावर्स. ठीक है. सो व्हेन वी सी द यूरोपियन पावर्स, the early powers were 2. The first one was Portuguese, the second one was Dutch. ठीक है. Then we'll see a shift. The shift will be English and the second one would be French. These two, they will be fighting 3 wars in India, and these are popularly known as Carnatic wars. Okay, first, second and third, and by third it will be the complete end of French, and we will have only one power, and this power will be responsible for the conquering of India. And simultaneously, like we discussed in the previous session, they will be ensuring initial administration, all the villages, etc., all the village areas, they will come under their control. एक बार जल्दी से इसको, एक लास्ट पार्ट छोटा सा बचा हुआ है, दैट इज फ्रेंच के बाद करते हैं. दिया होगा कि नहीं, बस ये वाला पार्ट आज कर लेते हैं. फोटो से ही समझ में आ रहा है. ठीक है. द Danish, because they were mostly interested in only one area, and that was the area of religion. Danish, Denmark and Norway together possessed colonial settlements in India and Tamil Nadu. All right. The Tranquebar in Tamil Nadu, Sirampur in West Bengal, and Nicobar Island were their possessions in India. 3 prominent areas. That's why even the missionaries are also known by these names: Tranquebar missionaries, Sirampur missionaries. So these were only having one objective, and that was of conversion. That was of bringing people in contact with Christianity. Danish managed to set up a factory at Masolipatnam. Small trading posts were established at Peepli, Hooghly River, and Balasore. Investors in Denmark wanted to dissolve the East India Company, but King Christian IV registered it finally after his death in 1648. His son Frederick abolished it कि नहीं हमें करना ही नहीं है, हमारा सिर्फ एक ही काम है. And what is that? Religious conversion. Second is East India Company was started in 1696. Trade between Denmark and Transkei resumed, but many new trade outposts were also established. The Nayak king of Tanjore gifted 3 villages surrounding Transkei to them. Danish settled in Andaman and Nicobar in 1755, but due to threat of malaria, they abandoned it in 1848. There is a very famous series which is going on these days, that is of Kala Pani. So Kala Pani mein jaise they talk about disease. So one major problem in that area was that of malaria, and that's why they had to leave it. During the Napoleonic War, the British caused heavy damage to their possessions. Sirampur was sold to the British in 1839. Transkei, another settlement, were sold in 1845. तो उन्होंने अपना सब कुछ बेच बाच के करे हम वापस यूरोप जा रहे हैं. बस इतनी सी हिस्ट्री है इन लोगों की, ठीक है. बट फ्रॉम एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू व्हाट यू विल रिमेंबर, दे केम बिफोर फ्रेंच. Okay, they came before French. Don't get confused. And in general, when we'll talk about socio-religious reform movements in India, there we'll talk about the role of Christian missionaries. There we'll have some understanding about the role which was played by them. These missionaries were not only involved in only one area, that is conversion. They also wanted reforms with respect to women, health reforms. Many reforms were established by them. Even some of them, they become part of the initial schools also. Some schools were opened by them. So we'll talk about that later on, their contribution specifically. But at the same time, they had some negative role also. The negative role was, they used to say that Hinduism, this is nothing but, this is the dark light. You know, this is a dark light. And Swami Vivekananda later on will say that these people, they created a kind of mentality in people who used to go to school, that your father, grandfather, mother, all are lunatics. वो सब उल्टा वुल्टा बात करेंगे. There's only one right thing, and that is Christianity. So those kinds of biased interpretation were a very big limitations of these Christian missionaries, because they were going only in one single direction. But बाद में हम बात करेंगे उनके बारे में, what were their positives and negatives. But from एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू एज सच इनका कुछ इतना इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट नहीं है. क्रोनोलॉजी हम देख सकते हैं, ठीक है. ईस्ट इंडिया, इनका भी क्या नाम था, ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी. एस्टैब्लिश सेटलमेंट एट ट्रनकेबार. 1676 एस्टैब्लिश सेटलमेंट एट सिरमपुर इन बंगाल. फेल्ड टू स्ट्रेंथन देमसेल्व्स इन इंडिया एंड बाय 1845 फोर्स्ड टू सेल देयर सेटलमेंट इन इंडिया टू द ब्रिटिश. ठीक है, तो यही बस इनका बेसिक्स है. यहाँ पे आपका ट्रनकेबार एरिया है, यहाँ पे आपका Sirampur area. Sirampur missionaries were the one who were very prominent because they were from the area of Bengal. तो बंगाल के एरिया में जब इनिशियल कुछ रिफॉर्म्स होंगे वहाँ पे we'll see the name of Sirampur missionaries. Okay. PPT आप लोगों के साथ शेयर कर देंगे, ठीक है. They were the first Protestant mission in India, and from its inception was started by German missionaries trained in Pitié schools and seminary founded by Frank at the end of 17th century. इतना इम्पॉर्टेंट है नहीं, उसको छोड़ सकते हैं स्लाइड को. थोड़ा फैक्चुअल इन्फॉर्मेशन है. सच इम्पैक्ट इज मोर इन टर्म्स ऑफ द रोल इन द अपलिफ्टमेंट ऑफ वुमेन, एजुकेशन रिफॉर्म्स, हेल्थ रिफॉर्म्स, वो सब बाद में देखेंगे. बट अभी के लिए बस इतना याद रखना है फ्रॉम द क्रोनोलॉजी पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, बिकॉज वंस वी सी द बिगिनिंग ऑफ ब्रिटिश, अभी एक बार बस ये ब्रिटिश वर्सेस फ्रेंच कल हम बात करेंगे, देन द मेन पार्ट ऑफ आवर हिस्ट्री विल स्टार्ट, दैट इज स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम प्लासी. कल हम एक बार 18th सेंचुरी को भी रिव्यू करेंगे. यू विल हैव हैंडआउट नंबर 2 व्हिच विल हैव द 18th century. There are some debates which we have to cover with respect to 18th century. We'll also see the structure of India in 18th century. Like the Mughals, they were declining from 1707 onwards. Simultaneously, we see the rise of Marathas under the Peshwas. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Third Battle of Panipat. And finally, a commentary on India's 18th century. If we see from British point of view, they always use the word dark age. Why dark age? Because they wanted to justify their colonial rule. But the facts say otherwise. They say India was one of the biggest or one of the richest country, both in terms of trading as well as in terms of percentage of GDP contribution to the world. So those facts we have to see. We'll see the historian viewpoints also. There are so many historians who have commented in terms of 18th century. And this is the part last year they asked in medieval. Medieval में 3 से 4 क्वेश्चन कहाँ से पूछे गए थे? 18th century से पूछे गए थे. So we'll try to cover all of those topics, including the individual states. We have to cover many states, like the state of Awadh we have to understand, Hyderabad we have to understand, Bengal will understand, okay, along with that मैसूर. तो अगली अपनी 4-5 क्लासेस में यही स्टेट्स वाला पार्ट चलने वाला है. और side by side we'll see the policies of British. So tomorrow first we'll finish this colonial rivalry between the British and French, and then we have to move forward with respect to characteristics of India, and then finally the steps taken by the British to create an empire. The first few classes they will mostly be with respect to these states only. In the previous orientation I have already mentioned to all of you कि भाई कम से कम 3 क्वेश्चन कहाँ से आते हैं, स्टेट से आते हैं. Last year, fortunately or unfortunately, 18th century was the epicenter of medieval India. 4 क्वेश्चन पूछ लिए थे वहाँ पे. Debate was asked on the economy of 18th century. Question was asked with respect to Mysore. One question was asked with respect to Punjab. So all those basic questions, there we are going to cover all of this in the next 5-6 classes. अभी हमारा यही काम है. अभी अपनी जो इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट है बहुत दूर है, ठीक है. अभी हम इन सब चीज़ों पे फोकस करेंगे. साइड बाय साइड विल फोकस ऑन आंसर राइटिंग. इज दैट क्लियर विद ऑल ऑफ यू? सो प्लीज राइट दीज 2 आंसर्स. आई एम गोइंग टू बी वेरी स्लो इन द बिगिनिंग. स्टार्टिंग में हम यही चाहता हूँ आप सब लोग कंफर्टेबल हो जाओ, तो आराम से आंसर राइटिंग पे फोकस करते हैं, थोड़ा थोड़ा सिलेबस कवर करते हैं. फिर एक पॉइंट आ जाएगा आफ्टर 7-8 क्लासेस आवर स्पीड विल इंक्रीज अ लिटिल बिट. बट अभी के लिए लेट्स ट्राई आवर लेवल बेस्ट टू लर्न इन द बिगिनिंग इटसेल्फ क्या इंपॉर्टेंट एरियाज हैं फॉर मॉडर्न इंडिया. ठीक है. Priyanka, that's a debate and that is more like political. Do you know about the difference between the navy of the Cholas and the Marathas? पता है कि नहीं पता है? सर क्या ये क्या होता है? नेवी क्या होती है? नेवी के लिए भी एग्जाम होता है. Anyway, so there was a difference in the navy structure of Cholas and that of Marathas. The Marathas, they were more adept in the territorial waters, very close to the shore. But if we see the Cholas, they were the true champions of the blue water. Like their navy has reached all the way up to Southeast Asia. They captured Maldives, the biggest tension in today's times. Just for that purpose, we should respect Cholas. Then they also conquered Sri Lanka. So that's why there's always a debate, because in our navy the emblem was changed and the Shivaji's emblem was adopted. ये देखो ये सब चीज़ें आपकी ऑप्शनल में नहीं आएंगी, मेंस में ये सब इंटरव्यू में पूछ लेते हैं वहाँ जाके. तो इसलिए हमें पता होना चाहिए थोड़ा सा इनके बारे में कि विच आर द हिस्टोरिकल डिबेट्स विच आर इन न्यूज़. सो प्रियंका, पॉलिटिकल देखो ज़्यादा रहता है. इफ वी गो बाय द फैक्ट्स देन चोलास वर मोर अडेप्ट. ओके. विकास, विद रिस्पेक्ट टू प्रीलिम्स, देखो मॉडर्न इंडिया की अगर प्रीलिम्स की स्ट्रेटजी समझनी है तो ये जानो कि वहाँ पे क्वेश्चन डिवाइडेड आते हैं, थीम्स की तरह ही आते हैं. नेशनल मूवमेंट से वहाँ भी 1-2 क्वेश्चन, वैसे तो ओवरऑल ही 3-4 ही आ रहे हैं, जहाँ तो आ नहीं रहे हैं, तो उसको इसलिए स्ट्रेटजी बनाना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है कि यार 4 क्वेश्चन अब कहाँ से आएंगे. बट इन जनरल 1 क्वेश्चन ऑलवेज कम्स फ्रॉम दीज कंपनीज से एक क्वेश्चन डालते ही डालते हैं वो. सेकंड, फिर आपकी कुछ पॉलिसीज़ हैं, एजुकेशन पॉलिसी, रिलीजियस पॉलिसी, वहाँ से क्वेश्चन आने के चांसेस हैं. एक आपकी इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज़ हैं, फ्रॉम देयर दे आस्क सम क्वेश्चंस. देन ट्राइबल, पीजेंट एंड ट्राइबल्स, फ्रॉम देयर ऑल्सो वी हैव गॉट सर्टन क्वेश्चन. फिर एक आपका ओवरऑल रेवोल्यूशनरी वाला पार्ट आएगा, रेवोल्यूशनरी से क्वेश्चन पूछ लेते हैं. आई वुड सजेस्ट कि ज़्यादा बुक्स के पीछे मत पढ़ो प्रीलिम्स के हिसाब से, हैंडआउट्स ही पढ़ो अच्छे से. साइड बाय साइड ओनली दोज टॉपिक्स जो बहुत ज़्यादा फैक्चुअल हैं सिर्फ वो स्पेक्ट्रम से कर लो. कुछ जैसे मान लो एजुकेशन है, अब अपने ऑप्शनल में एजुकेशन रिफॉर्म्स वी रिक्वायर ओनली टिल वुड्स डिस्पैच, उसके बाद अपना टॉपिक है ही नहीं एजुकेशन का. बट जब हम बात करते हैं प्रीलिम्स पे तो कुछ भी पूछ सकते हैं, रैंडम फैक्ट्स, तो वो आपको थोड़ा वो स्पेक्ट्रम में मिल सकता है. बट इन जनरल मैं यही कहता हूँ स्पेक्ट्रम आज की डेट में अवॉइड इसलिए करो बिकॉज यूपीएससी इज टारगेटिंग दैट बुक कि यहाँ से नहीं देंगे, कुछ हो जाए यहाँ से क्वेश्चन नहीं बनाएंगे. दे आर आस्किंग क्वेश्चन डायरेक्टली ईदर फ्रॉम, मतलब वो फैक्ट हो सकता है वहाँ भी हो लेकिन वो आपका एनसीईआरटी में भी होता है इन जनरल. तो अभी के लिए आप इस चीज़ पे फोकस करिए. अगर आप 24 अटैम्प्ट दे रहे हो तो शांति से क्लास में इतना पढ़ो, साथ में टेस्ट सॉल्व कर लेना, ठीक है. प्रीलिम्स के टेस्ट सॉल्व करोगे तो कुछ रैंडम इधर उधर की इन्फॉर्मेशन वैसे ही याद हो जाएगी, कंसेप्चुअली यू विल नॉट फेस एनी प्रॉब्लम। जैसे अब लास्ट ईयर भी यही पीपीटी हमने यूज़ किया था, जिस बच्चे ने अच्छे से फाउंडेशन पढ़ा उसको प्रीलिम्स में दिक्कत आनी नहीं चाहिए थी वो क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने में, बस सीधी बात है। तो आप लोग भी बस स्टार्टिंग में इतना इन्फॉर्मेशन कंज्यूम करो, थोड़ा बहुत जो एरिया बच जाएगा उसको बेसिक से आप आपका स्पेक्ट्रम से देख सकते हो, बट वो भी बहुत बेसिक वाला, मतलब सिर्फ फैक्चुअल वाला पार्ट, कंसेप्चुअल में मत घुसो, बिकॉज वो बुक दिखने में छोटी है बट उसमें पेज पता है कितने हैं, पता नहीं क्या बना, इतना पेज डाल दिया उसके अंदर, इतनी तो मॉडर्न इंडिया की हिस्ट्री भी नहीं जितना उस बुक के अंदर कंटेंट है, पता नहीं कहाँ से कॉपी पेस्ट करे जा रहे हैं। एक्चुअली बुक नहीं है ना, बुक उसके साथ प्रॉब्लम है वो कुंजी है, दिक्कत है यही है, 4 बुक का कंटेंट उठा के उसके अंदर डाल दिया, तो वर्ड को जस्टिफाई नहीं करती वो पब्लिकेशन को, स्पेक्ट्रम, ठीक है। इट शुड बी मोर लाइक कि मतलब हाँ बस सब कुछ डाल दिया हमने, जो जहाँ मिला, विकिपीडिया पे मिला, इधर मिला, उधर मिला, सब इसके अंदर बुक के अंदर हमने कॉपी पेस्ट कर दिया है। वो आप लोगों के लिए चैलेंजिंग हो जाता है, बिकॉज शुरुआत से लेकर लास्ट तक सिर्फ फैक्ट्स फैक्ट्स चल रहे हैं। अब कुछ बेसिक लेवल क्वेश्चन देखो वैसे भी सॉल्व कर पाओगे, लाइक आई रिमेंबर इन 2020 यूपीएससी आज द क्वेश्चन कि एक्सपोर्ट और इम्पोर्ट क्या होता था इंडिया और यूरोपियन कंट्रीज के बीच में, तो इट्स इजी टू रिमेंबर, कंसेप्चुअली पता चल गया ना कि हाँ स्पाइस ट्रेड होगा, टेक्सटाइल होगा, समझ में आ जाता है। अब वो उसमें लिखा हुआ था मान लो उस बुक में, तो पढ़ने का जरूरत तो फिर भी नहीं था। आई हैव नेवर रेड दैट बुक बिकॉज वो बुक है नहीं। एज ए टीचर ऑल्सो मुझे शर्म आती है वो बुक उठाने में भी, क्यों, बिकॉज वो किसी एस्टैब्लिश ऑथर ने नहीं लिखी है, वो इधर उधर से बस कंटेंट है उसको लिख दिया गया है। तो मॉडर्न इंडिया की आपकी कंसेप्चुअल नॉलेज कभी भी अच्छी नहीं हो सकती उस बुक से, वो सिर्फ फैक्ट्स के लिए है। तो अगर कोई एक आधा टॉपिक लास्ट में अपना जो ऑप्शनल में नहीं है डायरेक्ट रिलेशनशिप में अपने ऑप्शनल के सिलेबस के साथ में, बस वो वाला एरिया देख लेना। बाकी तो मैं यही कहता हूँ एनसीईआरटी इसलिए पढ़ना होता है, एनसीईआरटी में कभी कभार प्रीलिम्स में से कोई एक आधा क्वेश्चन निकाल लेते हैं ऐसे छोटे मोटे फैक्ट्स, तो बिपिन चंद्रा वाली एनसीईआरटी पढ़ो, क्लास नोट्स करो, आई थिंक 95% ऑफ द टाइम्स तो दिक्कत नहीं आएगी, और वो 4-5% तो फिर वो भी पढ़ के चलाना तब भी आएगी, बिकॉज इट्स इन देयर हैंड्स, दे आर कंप्लीटली ब्रूटल दे नो व्हाट टू डू एवरी ईयर। 2-4 क्वेश्चन ऐसे लेके आने सबको बुरा लगे, फैकल्टी को भी, टीचर, स्टूडेंट्स को भी सबको बुरा लगना चाहिए कि हाँ दिस होल स्कीम ऑफ द एग्जाम हैज चेंज्ड। बट इतना कर लो अभी के लिए, बिकॉज strategically preparing from last few years trends, many questions are not coming from modern India, so I would give more percentage of revision to ancient and medieval India, because 7 से 8 क्वेश्चन वहीं से आ रहा है विकास, ठीक है, तो आप उसको ज़्यादा प्रायोरिटी दीजिए एंड उसके बेसिस पे है। यश यू कैन हैव 1-to-1 सेशंस विद मी, डोंट वरी, ओके। Vyomika, in general, if you see the Portuguese were more enthusiastic about conversion. So later on, when these Dutch missionaries came, so they, even though they were Protestant, or the Danish, not the Dutch, the Danish, they were Protestant, but still they pursued those policies. Okay. Yes, medieval history is important, Neha, in prelims. Okay, don't leave it. No, don't refer to this book, Nitin Singhania. Don't refer to that book. Okay, वो भी बहुत बड़ी बुक है भाई, है ना, कि वो दैट इज ऑल्सो मतलब किलर ऑफ टाइम, इतनी बड़ी बुक नहीं पढ़नी, बिकॉज दोज क्वेश्चंस ऑफ एंशिएंट एंड मिडिएवल विच आर कमिंग, दे आर बेसिक लेवल क्वेश्चन, दे आर नॉट इन दैट बुक, इट ओनली कवर्स आर्ट एंड कल्चर। सो कुछ स्पेसिफिक एरियाज करने हो तो कर लो, जैसे मान लो पेंटिंग कर लिया, पेंटिंग इज वन एरिया विच कम्स रेगुलरली, म्यूजिक इट ऑल्सो कम्स रेगुलरली, बट आर्ट एंड आर्किटेक्चर तो वैसे ही आपका एंशिएंट मिडिएवल में अच्छे से हो जाता है। तो ओनली दोज एरियाज विच यू थिंक कि भाई थोड़ा सा कम इन्फॉर्मेशन है, बस उसको करो। आप बिना सोचे समझे अगर ज़्यादा पढ़ाई के चक्कर में जाओगे तो कंसोलिडेशन ऑफ द सोर्सेज विल नेवर हैपन, यू विल ऑलवेज बी डूइंग मल्टीपल थिंग्स, और फिर बाद में एक ही चीज़ समझ में आएगी, पेपर नहीं हो रहा है, क्यों नहीं हो रहा है, बिकॉज आप तरीका ही नहीं समझ रहे हो। किसी भी एक साल में एक ऐसा एरिया आ सकता है, मान लो किसी भी, मतलब हम 7-8 सब्जेक्ट हैं प्रीलिम्स में, हो सकता है एक साल हिस्ट्री से इतना टफ क्वेश्चंस आ जाएं कि इवन फ्रॉम ऑप्शनल यू विल फील लाइक यार 60% ही हो रहा है, बट देर नेक्स्ट टाइम इट कुड बी लाइक सारे के सारे क्वेश्चन आपके ऑप्शनल से हो जा रहे हैं सॉल्व, तो वो तो बहुत ही रैंडम प्रोसेस है, नो बडी कैन टेक ए गारंटी फॉर दैट। ओके, तो आप लोगों को बस ये रखना है बेसिक लेवल एंशिएंट मिडिएवल में स्ट्रॉन्ग रहो, एंड फैक्ट्स ऑफ एंशिएंट एंड मिडिएवल बिकम्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, लाइक लिटरेचर, आई टोल्ड यू मल्टीपल टाइम, लिटरेचर याद करो, बिकॉज वो पूछते हैं वहाँ जाके, ठीक है। सिमिलरली अगर आप देखोगे मैपिंग पोर्शन जो है आपका एंशियंट इंडिया का, उससे काफ़ी क्वेश्चन डायरेक्टली आ जाते हैं। जैसे अब कोई नहीं बोलेगा ये साइट्स लाइक बुरजा होम दे हैव आस्क्ड इन द एग्जाम, दे हैव आस्क्ड लाइक चंद्रनगर दे हैव आस्क्ड, तो वो अब चंद्रकेतुगढ़ उन्होंने पूछा है। वो पूछ रहे हैं तो इसका मतलब सीधा है कि आप अपना अपना सिलेबस भी अच्छे से करके आओगे तो यू विल हैव एन एडवांटेज ओवर अदर्स। बट हम अपना भी अच्छे से नहीं करते हैं, और फिर हम पूछते हैं और ये भी कर लें क्या, वो भी कर लें क्या। अरे भाई पहले लिमिट करो अपने आप को, और उस बुक में से सिर्फ वो चीज़ें करो जो आपने कहीं अगर ऑप्शनल में नहीं है, बिकॉज सिलेबस में बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं। अब म्यूज़िक हम इतना डिटेल में कहीं पढ़ते ही नहीं है, बिकॉज ऐसा हमारा सिलेबस का पार्ट नहीं है ऑप्शनल में। बट वहाँ पे थोड़ा बहुत म्यूज़िक के ऊपर आ जाता है कि हिंदुस्तानी म्यूज़िक वर्सेस कर्नाटिक, दोज काइंड्स ऑफ क्वेश्चन कैन कम इन जनरल स्टडीज़। तो वो वाला पार्ट आप बेसिक से कर लीजिए, बाकी के लिए योर नोट्स आर मोर देन सफिशिएंट। हमें क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने हैं, हमें रिसर्च पेपर नहीं लिखने म्यूज़िक पे। महिमा ऐसा देखो, ऑप्शनल में लिमिट से कोई फर्क पड़ता नहीं। इन जनरल स्टडीज देयर कैन बी अ लिमिट, ओके। जनरल स्टडीज देयर कैन बी अ लिमिट इन जनरल, ऑप्शनल में वो लिमिट लिखता भी नहीं है, तो अब जितना पेज है उतना भर सकते हो भर दो, ठीक है, कुछ फ़र्क पड़ेगा नहीं। वैसे भी बाद में हो ही जाता है, जब 4 पेज वाले में तो वैसे ही दिक्कत आ जाती है। यू विल नॉट फेस एनी प्रॉब्लम, ऐसा वर्ड लिमिट का गेम ही नहीं है वहाँ पे। नेहा यू कैन जस्ट रीड एनसीईआरटी बाय बिपिन चंद्रा, ठीक है। वो आपका मॉडर्न का कुछ इधर उधर का चीज़ें जैसे रह जाते हैं, जैसे अब वो इतना इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं। जैसे हम आपने एक टॉपिक पढ़ा होगा विद रिस्पेक्ट टू रिलेशनशिप ऑफ ब्रिटिश विद द फॉरेन पावर्स लेटर ऑन, लेकिन नेपाल के साथ क्या रिलेशन है, बर्मा के साथ क्या रिलेशन है, अफगानिस्तान वाला वॉर तो हमारे सिलेबस में आ जाता है, लेकिन ये सब नहीं आता। ट्रीटी ऑफ यांगबो वगैरह जो साइन किया है, ये सब नहीं आता हमारे में। तो वो आप एनसीईआरटी पढ़ लेते हो तो एक बार पूरा बर्ड्स आई व्यू मिल जाता है पूरे टॉपिक्स का। इसलिए एनसीईआरटी एक बार रीड करना है। इवन दो ऑप्शनल में कभी आएगा नहीं, बट प्रीलिम्स में कभी आ गया तो पता तो होना चाहिए ना कि हाँ ट्रीटी ऑफ यांगबो किसके साथ साइन की थी, एंड इन विच ईयर इट वाज साइंड, एंड व्हेन क्रोनोलॉजी टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चंस आर गोइंग टू कम व्हाट विल यू डू एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम। तो एक बार एनसीईआरटी पढ़ना मेरे हिसाब से सही रहता है। काफ़ी सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन आपको मिल जाती है और वो सफिशिएंट है आज की डेट में प्रीलिम्स के क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने के लिए। न्यू नहीं, ओल्ड एनसीईआरटी। न्यू एनसीईआरटी के पीछे नहीं भागना। न्यू एनसीईआरटी जो आपकी थीम्स इन इंडियन हिस्ट्री वाली है ना, वॉल्यूम 3, उसमें है ही नहीं। उसमें सिर्फ कुछ रैंडम थीम्स देके छोड़ रखी हैं, उसमें पूरा ठीक से सिलेबस कवर्ड नहीं है। वो थीम्स इन इंडियन हिस्ट्री सिर्फ वॉल्यूम 2 आप पढ़ लेना, मिडिएवल वाला, बिकॉज मिडिएवल में देर आर सर्टेन टॉपिक्स, देर लाइक 4-5 टॉपिक्स हैं वहाँ पे। एक तो ट्रैवलर्स का है, सेकंड इज़ विद रिस्पेक्ट टू विजयनगर, एक आपका भक्ति और सूफी का है, एक मुगल्स के ऊपर है। तो वो फिर भी अच्छी बुक है, बट मॉडर्न वाली तो ऐसे ही है, उसमें से कोई ज़्यादा काम की चीज़ आती नहीं है, ठीक है। एक्स्ट्रा टाइम हो ना तो ही ये सब चीज़ों में वेंचर आउट करो, अदरवाइज फोकस ऑन कंसोलिडेशन, आंसर राइटिंग, सॉल्विंग प्रीलिम्स टेस्ट सीरीज, दो शुड बी योर प्रायोरिटी एट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, ठीक है। यश वी कैन हैव 1-to-1 सेशंस, जब आप एक बार थोड़ा सा पढ़ाई लिखाई कर लो उसके बाद ही 1-to-1 सेशन करेंगे, तो फिर यही बातें चलेंगी सर और आप कैसे हो, आप भी अच्छे, आप भी अच्छे। तो कुछ पढ़ाई लिखाई कर लेते हैं थोड़ा सा, एक बार सिलेबस कवर हो जाए, टेस्ट वगैरह लिखोगे तो, एंड योर प्रिपरेशन विद रिस्पेक्ट टू जनरल स्टडीज़ ऑल्सो। ये पीपीटी हम अपलोड कर देंगे ताकि जो भी एक्स्ट्रा इन्फॉर्मेशन है इट विल स्टे विद यू। कल हम स्टार्ट करेंगे, थोड़ा सा आप प्लीज़ हैंड आउट नंबर 1 को पढ़ के आएंगे लास्ट का, कर्नाटिक वॉर्स, बिकॉज माई फोकस वुड बी ऑन मेकिंग यू अंडरस्टैंड द कंसेप्ट्स। द आंसर राइटिंग ऑफ दीज टॉपिक्स इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर ऑल ऑफ अस। हर साल यहाँ से क्वेश्चन आना है कर्नाटिक वॉर्स के आसपास से, तो आप इस चीज़ को समझ लीजिए कि हमारा फोकस सिर्फ फैक्ट्स पे नहीं होएगा ऑप्शनल में। ऑप्शनल में उसका काम ही नहीं है, बहुत कम काम होता है। आपको बेसिक फैक्ट्स भी याद हैं, ठीक है, यहाँ पे फ़ायदा मिलेगा जब कॉन्टेम्प्ररी कमेंट्स याद हैं, जब अंडरस्टैंडिंग बहुत अच्छे लेवल की हो गई हर टॉपिक की, तो उस पर हम ध्यान देंगे। तो कल हम इसको कवर करेंगे, तो आप प्लीज़ हैंड आउट आपको पहले, आई थिंक ऑनलाइन भी टिल 2 हैंड आउट आपको, एक मिला है 2 मिले, एक मिला ना, तो आप आज सेकंड भी ले जाइए। एक बार रफली रीड कर लीजिए क्लास से पहले, ताकि क्लास में आए तो फिर मज़ा आए। वी कैन फोकस ऑन द आंसर राइटिंग मोर रेदर देन जस्ट सेम इन्फॉर्मेशन मैं आपके सामने रीड आउट कर रहा हूँ, इट विल नॉट मेक एनी डिफरेंस। हैंड आउट नंबर 2 ऑनलाइन तो अपलोडेड है ना, और ऑफलाइन में डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करवा देना अभी क्लास के बाद, ठीक है। क्लास इज गेटिंग ओवर, आ जाओ, ठीक है। ओके चलिए आज यहीं पे एंड करते हैं। कल आप लोग, कल हम यहीं से स्टार्ट करेंगे, कल से हमारा मेन पार्ट ऑफ द सिलेबस विल स्टार्ट। टुडे वाज मोर लाइक वार्म अप, फिर से कल से स्टार्ट करते हैं, ठीक है। British versus French, and then the policies of British.